There we go. All right. So as I mentioned a few seconds ago, I had a significant emotional event with my family. So I would first like to start off by saying thank you to Chris Lavoie, who's the uh, vice president for MD Publishing. She had a great suggestion of the fact that I couldn't come to you guys, that I could do this virtually and still be participant, and I'm completely thankful for that. The next person I'd like to say thank you to is the young lady that was just talking, Jamie. I first learned about ICE because of Jamie at a different conference in Anaheim a few years ago, and I was walking up and down the aisles, and she was just bundle of joy. So finally, one day I had to ask her, "Who are you? Who are you representing?" And she said, "We're a different conference, and we'd like you to come present." And I told her someday I would do it, and it took me a while, and this is not exactly the way I expected to do it, but here I am, and let's go ahead and get going. So I would like to say thank you to both those two fine human beings who helped me in this time. I do have a couple of disclosures I need to put, actually my disclosure sign I need to put out. I have no actual potential conflict of interest in relation to this presentation. The comments and or opinions that I'm going to express are my own. While I may be citing different sites or businesses, I'm giving you my own opinion. My last disclosure, I will have to put it out. I am slightly dull, and you just might fall asleep faster than the time you were in Binstein's class. So I apologize, but hey, you're still gonna get credit as long as you don't plop your head on the table. But hopefully you'll come out of this with some tips on how to be engaged and how to engage your staff. And for those of you who are kind of looking at the wall going, who's Binstein? This is the greatest guy right there. If you have a funny TV show you want to watch, look it up, When Binstein's Money. So why did I decide to talk about engagement? Several reasons. Namely, it's what we need. I feel engagement when it comes to the patient care arena, whether you're a radiology technologist, whether you're a leader for radiology, whether you're in the biomed world, we cannot afford to not be engaged. If we make a mistake, there's an effect on our safety of our patients and the safety of each other. So that's something I've always been interested in, and I wanted to talk about it. Now, I'm gonna be honest. There's not a magic solution to keep employees engaged. I wish there was. I wish there was a, genie in a bottle that we can do and go from there, but there's not. And it doesn't, and I may also add, it doesn't stay the same method from location to location. There's bases to each, but you've got to know your personnel, you've got to know your mission, and you've got to know the patient to move forward. So there's a lot of moving parts. So our outline is going to roughly go over this. We're going to talk about why you should care. We're going to talk about what Gallup is stating is the current state of employee engagement. We're going to talk about those different levels of employee engagement. We're going to talk a little bit throughout this whole session about ways to demonstrate and model to help encourage our employees and staff and co-workers in the other departments. Then we're also going to talk about how we can create an environment that fosters employee engagement. It also can be interchanged with the word of inclusion. I'm going to spend my last two slides talking about some of the lessons learned about the COVID-19 stressor and how I saw the 3 different organizations I've been involved with in the last year, how they went about it and what was best lessons learned. And throughout the duration of this speech, or I'm sorry, this session, we're going to talk about different indicators of an engaged organization, so that hopefully while you're sitting here and listening, you're saying, you know what, that's a good idea, or hey, we're doing that, but I need to improve upon it. All right. So, but first, my why. Primarily because I tend to like the people I work with. I want to make sure that my area is the best. I was in wrestling in high school. Thought I was going to be a firefighter before I discovered something called the Army and the radiology world. So I've always been part of a team. And when you're part of an organization, everybody wants it to be the best, right? Because then you can brag, you can make fun of it. There are members probably sitting in this conference right now that I know that I have messed with before because they're part of the Air Force. And I always say, well, when I was in the Army, we were better than you. You know, that's jokingly, it's ribbing, but that's the kind of thing I like to do. So learning about engagement and how to improve engagement from not just myself, but with the staff and fellow workers allows me to make sure my organization's better. Oh, I'm sorry, I was getting some background sound. Secondarily, I want to speak about this because of my personal experiences. I've gone through so many organizations, being in the military, moving around, and now being out of the military and being part of the VA, that sometimes our staff just feel broken down and deflated. And so I always want to learn how to, like I said, with my primary reason for doing this, how to do this. My next why to you is it didn't matter whether I was working as a stock clerk when I was a 16-year-old, I will say punk, whether I was working in the Army, let's just say, not home, let's just say Army. I guess that's a Freudian slip. My 6 months that I worked at Lowe's between the Army and working the VA is we had the tools, but we don't always know how to use them. So it's my hope that as I speak about these experiences, the stuff that I've learned, that you yourself get the right tools to help you use the ladder correctly to get over the wall, as the comic says. So why engagement? So the Gallup poll, in their first iteration of the employee engagement report, found that disengaged employees cost the United States somewhere between this branch. As you can see, this is kind of set up so I can ask you guys the question in person, but I'm not there. So I'll save the awkwardness of asking somebody to raise their hand. But it's actually between 450 and 550 billion dollars a year. That's what it costs the United States. I mean, that is a range in thinking about people taking time off. So you have to pay them sick leave, but you don't have them there giving you a product. When that person's missing, you know, one of us is going to have to take their place. So that takes us away from the other position we were doing or the other mission we were doing. Same thing also goes now when I have always seen a trend that when I have a lot of call outs or when somebody's not there, we tend to have some of our highest patient complaints because they're not being serviced quick enough. So when patients aren't happy or the customer isn't happy, depending on the scenario, how do they show that? Well, they filed a complaint, but the next time they may go to the services across the street or downtown, maybe a little bit further, but at least they feel that that person is going to be engaging with them and take care of them. So the medical world cannot afford to not be engaged. What if this was on your wall, that this plaque was outside your wall? In 2020, we had 245 patients suffer from preventable harm in this hospital. Our goal for 2021 is to drop it down by 20 patients. So far this year, we've only had 180 patients. Welcome to our hospital. Let's be honest, we would freak out if we were that patient coming in. Preventable harm has been shown by several studies. It's been shown by the Joint Commission through their HRO initiative that preventable harm, the causes for it tends to be a lack of engagement. So why engagement? Organizations that are best engaging their employees have the reverse of what you saw in that last sign. They have earnings per share growth. They are better customer engagement. There's a higher productivity. There's an increased retention. I, as a supervisor, would love to have increased retention. If I could spend all my time that I have on not hiring someone, I could probably get my job done even quicker. But as I lose people, I now have to go through the process of spending time of hiring. And let's be honest, we know it's hard to hire people right now. Of course, adding back to the last screen, fewer accidents. And the last one, Gallup says that there's a 21% higher profitability. So the previous Gallup research has also shown that employee engagement is a consistent predictor of many important organizational outcomes across more than 2 decades, even during massive changes in the economy and technological advances. We'll actually talk about what happened during 2020, and if we all recall, there was a couple of interesting things going on, such as COVID and some of the social unrest. But when you marry up a employee engagement survey with a customer service survey like Press Ganey, you'll start seeing the indicators across the board. And that's what this is also talking about. So engagement. When you see an engaged team, what comes to your mind? For me, I do think about some of the past organizations I've been part of, but my wife actually works for the University of Washington Medical Center as an MRI tech. And if you've never been up to this area of Seattle, it's basically right there on part of the Sound, which comes off the Pacific Ocean. And when she's on call, we tend to get a Airbnb right there so she can go back and forth because we live a distance. And so in the morning, when she gets called in, I tend to go sit out on the porch and I see this. I see a lot of rolling tubes. And to me, the other day, I had this epiphany. I said, man, that is a fully engaged team. You watch the rows, the oars come out in sync. You hear the voice prompts, and they keep on going, and just the motion. And I was like, wow, how are they that engaged? And you know what it's from. It's from constant practice. They're out there on a daily basis. But when I saw that, I also kind of chuckled to myself because I thought of a personal experience. And when rowing probably was not exactly as good as this. And that was my trip to Hawaii in 2019. And this was a little canoeing boat, which you can't really see in the background, all the way in the back, is that there was a storm coming in. So while the water was a little gentle, it kept sucking us out. Me and my daughter had never gone on a canoe, let alone on a canoe together. I thought that I was supposed to do the deep, paddles to kind of keep us moving. And she thought she was supposed to do a little one. What was supposed to be a 30-minute canoe ride back from this beautiful island actually turned into about a 45-minute ride. And so we laughed at ourselves. Funny story though is the person who took the picture was my wife in the other canoe, and she was facing us, so she kept going around in circles with my other daughter. But I just kind of want to put that picture in your mind. I thought it was kind of a chuckle. So how many of you guys have fallen asleep yet? All right, we'll keep moving on. Don't answer. So 2020 Gallup polls results. So with everything that happened in 2020, what do you think the polls expressed? I myself was a little surprised when I started doing the research. So in May of 2029, it talks about employee engagement continues historic rise amid coronavirus. I was really like, what, shocked by that. I thought for sure, because of COVID operations, that a lot of people were going to be disenfranchised and sad. But it felt like, as you read the articles, a lot of people gave the expression, especially in the medical field, that I have an important mission. I am going to take care of my fellow man, and we're going to get this and knocked down. Well, come by late June, this had dropped considerably. And I'll talk about what that was afforded to, but it had to do a lot with the wild summer we had, whether it was both political and some of the racial divides. I'll go out and say, and that kind of contributed to it. So really what you were seeing throughout the different points in 2020 was a bad ticker. It was going up and down. I'm gonna go ahead and show you the actual Gallup poll results for the year. So the fluctuations were remarkable. As I mentioned early in May, that we had a high employee engagement. It was at 38%. But by June, due to the political and a lot of the news events, the whole nation was having issues and they just didn't feel engaged. A lot of people said, even though I'm taking care of my patients, they're dying and we can't help them. And then when I go home, I'm seeing all this strife. So there was no release for staff. There was no release for their family members. By June, I'm sorry, by late June going into mid-July, this had actually started to improve. So this May drop, like I said, was mainly attributed to respondents that were, believe it or not, in managerial or leadership positions. When they were polled and they were asked what was going on, why, they said that not only were their staff in such bad peril mentally and emotionally, that some of them were quitting just because they found better jobs or they were taking travel jobs, and it now left them as the leaders trying to mold the rest of the team, and they were being stressed out. The other group that felt that was part of the May drop were non-white respondents and those with Democratic political party affiliations or independents. I know it's a touchy subject because we all have different political affiliations, but these were the answers that were given by the respondents. So I'm not going to go down the avenue of saying who's wrong or who's right, but I just, to properly go about engaging our staff, we need to know the big picture. Additionally, the drop was sharper for people working on site versus at home. I know through my own experiences that I was kind of happy that I was working from home for a little while. When all this happened, I was in a point of transition from the military. And because I was not in direct patient care and I had less than 90 days in the Army before I started my terminal leave, my command turned around and said, hey, we'll only call you to come in when we need you for help and stuff like this. But in the meantime, you need to kind of prepare yourself for getting out of the military. So as I was talking to my battle buddies, as we call each other, a lot of them were stressed out that they had to be at work and they weren't at home with their family. They were nervous about his safety because we were having bad information across the board. We were having different types of sit-ins or riots, if you will, and it's stressing people out because that's our backyard because we're in Washington State. Another part of this was blue collar service workers. Those were the ones that tended to actually have to go to work on site. I also kind of felt this stress myself because as I got out of the Army and I was waiting to get into a government service position, I had to wait 6 months. There's a clause that keeps you from jumping straight in because they don't want you to create your own position. So I took a job volunteering working at Lowe's. Well, I didn't volunteer, I was getting paid, let me be honest. But I went working at Lowe's knowing that I was not gonna be working for 6 months, and I told them I would like a seasonal job stocking. Well, it started off all fine, but then they started bringing me onto the sales floor. And if you haven't been to a Lowe's or a Home Depot in the last 6 months, then you do not know how busy it is. and it's kind of nerve-wracking when people talk about the distance precautions and it's not being followed. I was actually kind of surprised to find out that the stress level was larger for men than women per the Gallup report. I tried to find a research of why, and they never really dictate why, but I wanted to put that in there because I was kind of surprised, and I think that we all should know what was reported. So this is actually for the whole Gallup whole trend since they started running it in 2000. When they first did it, it was in 2018, but it was only from January through June, and they went full force in 2000. And you'll see that over the 20-year period, that the top line where it talks about engaged staff, we only at any given time have had 28 to 30% average of our staff that are considered fully engaged. Whereas we have actually gone down from a high in 2007 to 14% actively disengaged. And we'll talk about what that engaged means and actively disengaged means in a few minutes. So the final actually Gallup poll results showed that there was 36% engaged performers. 51% were not engaged, kind of there for taking a ride. And then you have your 13% actively disengaged, what we like to call the saboteurs. It kind of worked out that I found this photo that is about riding a boat. It kind of goes back to my initial example when I opened this up. And this photo right here gives a real good visual of what they believe the trip of engagement. Your loyal and psychologically committed team of 36% means they have the buy-in for what your mission is. They're there. They're the gentlemen and women who raise their hand to help when you need help. The 13% right there that actively just disengage, they're physically present, but they're psychologically absent. They're unhappy and insist on sharing this unhappiness with others. I imagine that one or two of you chuckled in the audience because you know who that person is. Because as leaders, we tend to spend, most of our time with these staff members. 51% is not actively engaged. That's kind of, to me, was very shocking as I started to learn about the levels of engagement. That meant that over half of our staff, on a national average, they're at work, they're doing their job, but they're the ones who are looking to see what time break is. They're the ones who are looking to see what time lunch is. They're the ones who are looking to see what time it is to get to home and they're getting out there. Possibly some of you in this session right now, I'm going to do the bad joke, are in this platform because you're looking to see when's the hour mark from here. You're going to yourself, God, he's been talking for 30 minutes already and I still have another hour. So I'm going to hope I heard a couple of you laughing and that you're shaking your head from side to side saying no. So this talks about the same boat, different engagement. Some drive, some ride along, some jump off, some actually fall off. The term some fall off, I'm referring to those who are not actively engaged staff members who actually now become actively disengaged. These are the personnel that I like to try to bring up into the engaged performers. So let's go ahead and break down the different levels of employee engagement. The first one is, as I mentioned, is the engaged one. It's also referred to the fully engaged. They go on above and beyond. They are busy, but still raise their hands. In the radiology world, and in my world of doing management with them, this is always the one who raises their hands and says, when I need somebody to help volunteer for Radiology Tech Week, to come up with stuff, to help raise money, to do whatever it is. Sometimes one year, there was ASRT offered free CEUs unlimited free CEUs during Tech Week, but you had to teach the class yourself. So I sent out the invitation to all my members in my department. That's when I was down in San Antonio in Brooke Army Medical Center, one of the largest military facilities in the world. And I only had 4 people raise their hand to volunteer. So what I did was, I'll talk about that in a few minutes, I'm sorry. We'll talk about now, the next one is the non-engaged staff. Like I said, these are people who come to work, do their job, and go home. For the most part, their work is good. Don't get me wrong. They're not bad performers, but they're not giving it their all that you know they could. What I always try to do is I try to give them more. Oh, I'm sorry. When you try to give them more, they'll be out the door before you can say, would you mind? You have the ability to move them to the activity engaged group. And I'll talk about that in a couple of slides later about how you get them engaged. Then we have our last category, which is known as the actively disengaged. They're unreliable, withdrawn, apathetic, asocial. They have a high no-show rate. When they do show up, sometimes you wish they would stay home. The biggest cause, besides the fact that they can make a lot of work for you, is they can also bring those not engaged down. Here are some signs that an engaged employee is no longer fully engaged. Think about that person you can count on for everything, but not so much anymore. They used to raise their hands. Remember the person who always wanted to do the plum assignments? Well, that's not a problem anymore because they don't want to do it. They want to let other people do it. I just want you to think about that. So how do we kind of go about managing disengaged employees? Some of these are examples that have been given when in my readings. Some of these I've actually just learned the hard way. And when I'm trying to decide how to mentally categorize this staff member, I always have to ask myself, am I asking for commitment from this staff member, or am I asking for compliance? When I'm thinking that I'm looking for compliance, I categorize them into actively disengaged. So I'm just trying to get them to do the bare minimum. If I'm asking for them to give me a little bit more commitment, I'm realizing these are the staff members that we could kind of bring on a little bit more. Now, as I mentioned, from my experience, openly calling somebody out doesn't help anything. And then we actually call somebody out, let's be honest, it can lead to other issues. Whether you yourself have to go before another organization to answer why you did that personally, to you polarize a team when you call somebody out. So what I like to do is instead, and this is not doing the quarterly counseling, I like to do rounding sessions with all my staff, even if it's just walking up and say, hey, can we talk for a few minutes when they're not doing it with patients? And I like to let them know, hey, I kind of notice you're not your usual you know, like that commercial talks about. And I kind of open up and I let them talk. I think I tell them how their behavior is impacting members, how it's impacting the mission. I don't do it in an accusatory way. I try to do it open-ended. Sometimes we get ruts. For example, the reason I am not here is something significant happened in my life. I'm not openly telling you because it's personal, you know. It also deals with a family member, and it's disrespectful for me to talk about them. This may happen at work. Not everybody's talkative like me. Not everybody tells you everything. So you got to keep that in mind. So when this happens and they tell you what goes on, or you're going to want to find out what prompted this behavior change. And like I said, ask them what has caused the change. If they tell you, awesome. Then maybe it's something you didn't know that you did yourself. It's about feedback. That's why I've always felt rounding is one of the greatest tools. And when I say rounding, I mean, I get up out of my office, I go to my different areas and I talk to the people. I don't just do lip service and, stand there for 4 minutes or 5 minutes. I go to them. My last position, I had radiology, I had lab, I had physical therapy, I had pharmacy, and I had surgical services. So that's 5 different departments. So what I try to do was 1 hour a day, and I know we don't have a lot of white spaces on the calendars, but I try to go around and be available. I try to do the rounding with them. I try to be actively engaged. I also did it 2 different ways, depending on what's going on. I didn't go directly to my direct report's office every time. I would ask them sometimes, hey, show me your phlebotomy, or show me that new ultrasound machine. So what that did was they took me, and I learned about what was going on about the department if I didn't know. And what was happening was they were showcasing their department. And a lot of times they would turn around and have that staff member that was doing that showcase their department. So what you see is being done right here is a couple things. First of all, the staff member that reports to my direct report is getting an opportunity to speak to somebody, and he is now developing that person. I am showing that staff member that I'm interested in their area, that their department leader is showing them off, and it goes around and it kind of works up and down. I also feel that by coming out of my cave or my cubby hole, depending on where I'm working, and coming to you, I'm demonstrating to you what I'm expecting you to do. My bosses have always done that to me, especially in the last 5-10 years as the high reliability organization imperative or is trying to be introduced. Now, some of the things you need to remember when you're managing disengaged employees. We are attempting to get them back in the fold. We're also trying to have them drive part of the conversation so they have the buy-in. Sometimes when we come in and we do a one-sided conversation, we turn off our receptors. I feel like I might be, and I see it every day because I have 2 teenage daughters, so it happens. We also have to remember when we're talking to our disengaged employees, we're not at a punitive state. It's just you as a leader seeing that they have lost some of their drive, some of their mojo. Ask them in meetings sometimes, do you have an idea? Don't single them out, but ask, a variety of people group. I have found that this actually has been a very good tool. It also, excuse me, it's important to understand that you're not going to save, okay, I should say this now. We know we're not always going to save everybody, but we got to try it. It's our responsibility as leaders, because at the end of the day, our mission is what? To take care of our patients. If we don't have the resources or the resources properly staffed, we can't do that. One of my favorite things is when I'm talking to somebody is to remember, avoid the hint and hope communication. Saying, boy, that grass is really getting tall out there is not asking or telling somebody they need to mow their yard. Okay. And a lot of times we need to remember, I don't necessarily agree with the skills portion of this quote because of our career fields. We have a very high technical skill that we need to have to maintain our job, whether we're working the biomed field or in radiology. But I do agree with the fact that I hire for attitude. When we bring people in, they may be highly qualified compared to the person next to them because they have this years of experience, but I do not always score them at that high on that. That means they met the necessity, they met the basic needs that I needed. And as we go through our conversation, I want to see what makes them tick. Are they going to fit our team? And then, of course, once we bring them on, we have to continue to foster relationships with those who are engaged and work especially hard because we have to move that dial of the moderate disengaged into the engaged camp. As for the highly disengaged, many will say that you need to cut your losses. I only want to say I do this when I have exhausted all my opportunities. One, because I talked about how hard it is to bring somebody on. Two, I kind of take it as a personal challenge that if somebody's not meeting what they need, how do I help them get there? It's not about my ego that I think I'm a super leader, but it's more about the fact that I think everybody has the opportunity to excel, and everybody truly at the end of the day wants to be part of the team. But there are all those times when you get to something and you just exhausted all your opportunities. And I learned a phrase recently. It's called Gitmo. I learned it from a presenter that actually has presented on the ICE webinars. Her name is Janelle Burns. She's an organizational effectiveness manager at the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. If you go to the ICE webinars website, you can actually listen to her speak. She did a course called on how to have effective conversations, especially when it's difficult. And oh, by the way, what's wonderful part about using this webinar, if you haven't seen these, it's free. Okay. So Gitmo, she was talking about this. It's good enough to move on. So it's you got to know sometimes when you got to cut the line and move on. And you and your leadership and your organization need to kind of figure out what these parameters are. So I kind of highly encourage that you and your leadership go back and decide what that is. It's going to be different for each of you. So there's some myths about engagement. The first myth is that there is only so much that can be done by the organization. I think this is a misconception that is a result of companies doing the same things over and over without much in terms of results. Why do the same thing to try to get your staff engaged? Sorry, I thought that popped up. If your employee engagement program is falling flat, have an open conversation with your people regarding how you can do better, job supporting and connecting with them. Sometimes, this is at a higher organizational level. Maybe you, as a leader of your organization, can talk to that level and say, hey, what is these organizations that are doing really high doing so well? You are at this organization right now. I'm sorry, you're at this conference right now and you're networking. You can reach out to the person to your left or right, if there's more than one of you in the session, and say, hey, what have you done well? Try something different. The next myth about engagement is managers aren't directly affected by employee engagement. As we learned earlier in the Gallup poll, that's false. There was a higher level of stress by managers when everything happened this last year. And here's a scenario I kind of would like you to think about. It's a little generic, but I think it hits the point. We have leader one. They've done a great job engaging their people. They communicate frequently. They give regular feedback on performance, and not just during the quarterly performance. They use the rounding and engage with them. And they always tend to put their people first, not necessarily sacrificing their own time, but their staff know that their leader has their back. It's actually to the point that they have such a great recidivism and people stay. Now, leader two, their team member finds that they are a little distant. At review time, they'll have a brief conversation with them with a generic performance that doesn't include notable accomplishments. The employee turnover in that department is high. Now, the first manager is going to have a lot less stress. I mean, we can all agree with that, at least from employee engagement. Whereas the other manager might be setting themselves up for failure. So managers are definitely affected by the terms and level of their engagement, as well as the level of engagement from the staff above them. that support them. The third myth about engagement, the effectiveness of employee engagement surveys. A lot of times people say employee engagement surveys only give us a snapshot of how employees feel at that time. But that's what we're doing. That's what we're trying to find. We're trying to find a one window of time of what's going on. A lot of people believe that no one's ever going to listen to me. So I'm just going to go ahead and say bad, 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 bad across the board. I think when you do a employee engagement survey that's just once a year and it's only at the level of the overall organization, that's where the effectiveness goes away. I think a second step where the effectiveness goes away of these is when there's not feedback. I've been in organizations where they do a survey in January and you never hear anything about the results coming back. So how do I, as a staff member, feel like I've been listened to, or that my opinion has been taken into account? So when I say at an organization level versus a department level, there are things that you can do that aren't exactly a written form. You can actually walk around and as part of your rounding, especially if you're genuine and listening, people know, and ask them what's going on. I'm not saying you have to drop everything you do to fix that one incident at that time, but you take into account and you move on and try to find out, is this a trend? The next myth, and I believe it's the largest myth about engagement, is that employee engagement programs by themselves move the needle on employee engagement. This whole week, you guys have been part of this conference and you've learned different things, where it's talking about resiliency, whether it's talking about patient responsiveness, getting them on board. All of this fits in together. Everything is actually a big puzzle. And I wouldn't say it's a regular 1,000 piece puzzle. I would say it'd be more like a 1,000 piece Rubik's Cube. Everything affects itself. When you see the blue, you can't just work at trying to get the blue side taken care of. You have to work for the green. You have to work for the yellow. Now, I myself have been terrible at Rubik's Cubes, but I can remember as a kid that my father got very upset with me because back then you used to be able to take the stickers off. And yeah, I solved the problem, but did I really solve the problem the correct way? And if you recall those Rubik's Cubes back then, they, at least the Rubik's Cube I had, was not exactly the highest quality one. So when I moved the sticker around, after a while, that sticker started falling off and start ebbing away. So when you engage a department or your staff, you have to remember that you're not just going in blindly and taking care of one thing. Like I said a few minutes ago, you did a couple of different sessions this week that I hope that you attend. I know that if I was going to attend, these were the ones that I was pining for to look at because I felt that they kind of helped me with learning about my engagement. Kenneth Fazzino talked about inspiring, encouraging, and empower. By that, what he was doing, he was talking about how you improve your staff, how you set up the table for the next work by giving them the ability. When you're doing this, you're actively engaging your staff. You make them feel like they are part of the team, that their point counts. Brenda did a class on how to be resilient during stressful times. Engagement is very important during this. We've got to go around and be able to check on people. We've got to know how to help us get through. Jason did the session on the importance of imaging role in patient experience. If your department is not engaged, they're going to have a terrible patient experience. They may get their services they need, but do they feel like they were taken care of properly? Do they feel like they got what they needed? We talked about that in the Gallup poll about the I'm sorry, we talked about the interaction of a Gallup poll with the patient experience, as well as with the Press-Ganey experience and how they reflect each other. Limes to margaritas, employee morale post, COVID. That was the one I wanted to go because I heard she was handing out martinis during the session. Did that happen? Okay, I know. I know she did. I know she did. And I really was excited to see that one too, because let's be honest, we're in that phase where we have to start talking about what's next and how we can morale. And that's a prime example of engagement. Nicole, my good friend, she talked about leading with cultural sensitivity. We're not the same people across the board. So we have to be able to work. We have to know what our biases are so that we do not alienate each other. Because when we alienate each other, we cause polarization on a team. A team that's polarized is not actively engaged. And that's like I said, while engagement may not have been included in the word, may not be included in their sessions, the word is part of each session and the action. So I brought up a term called earlier called high reliability organization. Most of the 3 organizations I've been part of over the last 10 years in the medical field have actually been going through this journey. I'm not going to talk about the whole thing about what it is, but engagement is a major part of this. These are the 3 imperatives of being an HRO, and they're sequential. The first step of this, of course, is the leadership commitment. For me, the words commitment and engagement are very interchangeable. I kind of gave the example earlier, you can't sit behind a desk and fire off emails or lead by proxy. You have to get out there and show that you are committed to this. I know some of you have gone through the same experience of trying to implement a new HR, whether it's Epic, Cerner, or another one. And not just at your local area, but across the whole healthcare system. We did that at Madigan Army Medical Center. We introduced a platform of CERN, which the VA is also now doing so that they can speak to each other. The first set of leadership that was part of it just said, yeah, we're going to do it, but they didn't give us the tools. And so there was a comment made, say, hey, if this fails, we'll just keep using the old equipment. So people who don't want to be part of change, if you go to a change management class, you have to constantly talk about what the buy-in is to get people to accept it. We always want what's the grass, we always look at the grass as greener on the other side of the fence. But do we necessarily want to climb that fence to get to the other side? I mean, there's splinters. I mean, I might fall if I go over your side. It's scary. I'm comfortable at least with what I know. So if the leader is not engaged and commits to this, you're not going to have an HRO. You're not going to have a true engaged organization. To me, I say these are imperative and sequential because when the leadership commitment starts and we demonstrate to the organization, we can move on to the next step, which is going to be a culture of safety. Excuse me for a second. So how do we foster a culture of safety when we have staff that are checked out? Engagement. We show that we're committed to being a better organization, that we truly value what staff is talking about. And engagement in this imperative includes protecting the staff when they speak up. It talks about celebrating the small wins, celebrating the good catches, celebrating what we do. The last imperative of being an HRO is continuous process improvement. When we celebrate the first 2 imperatives, we set the table for encouraging staff to want to get better at the way they deliver. They feel safe. They know that if they bring it up, even if it's kind of a bad idea, it'll be looked at and actually talked about, and it may foster or it may actually rainbow into a different type of action, but it had its roots in being a process improvement that we were just trying to get something better. A big one like this right here also talks about the willingness to accept change. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what motivates and engages employees. So we know it's not everything, but money has a huge impact on the way an employee feels about their job. People want to be paid what they're worth. Today's employees are also looking for opportunities for advancement, professional. I'm not going to get into the generational gap or anything like that, but that's an honest approach to it. Strong leaders who people want to follow, care about their people, and show it by helping them grow. So our staff wants us to show a concerted effort in their own growth. It's just the way it goes. Now, a sense of purpose is also high on the list of what motivates today's workers. For us in the medical field, we know what our sense of purpose is. We want to take care of our patients. We want to take care of ourselves. But sometimes that gets lost when there's a poor engagement across the board. So how do you also properly and positively influence your staff? I like to use a term called weeding. It kind of goes back to you need to sometimes weed out those distractors, some of those ones who are not actively engaged. Communication is the next one, is very positive. You don't have to have a daily huddle for a huddle. You don't have to be in the military. We used to always talk about being there 10 minutes prior to the 10 minutes prior to the 10 minutes prior, because the first line supervisor had to talk to you before you talk to the next one. What this is talking about, it's got to be meaningful. It's got to be short and to the point. The next one is give meaningful feedback. The difference between meaningful and just feedback is I like to ask people why something happened. I just want to know what their thought process was for doing something. And I'm talking about whether I'm doing the quarterly or I'm doing the walk around. And I learned that from a leader. I growing up in the military, I was a very aggressive young guy. Maybe it has something to do with being short. I don't know. But I was always one of the ones who want to jump in and do something, just do it, get it done with it. And I was like, well, if this person can't do it, I'm going to do it because I have to get the mission done. So I had one leader who was teaching me the 5 whys before I even knew what the 5 whys were. And that to me was such a meaningful feedback because I had to actually explain why I was doing it. And a lot of times it came down to I was an idiot. I didn't take the look at the big picture and understand why what everybody else is doing. So another big positive influence is deepen your interactions. Know your staff. I'm gonna be honest, it's gonna be, and you know this, it's gonna be completely impossible to know everybody in your organization. But when you do know something a little bit about somebody, something that you have in common, or something what helps makes them tick, it makes them feel special. So in my attempts at doing this, I take the approach that engagement starts with me. To be able to do this, I have these 3 questions, and I'm going to talk about them over the next couple of slides. How am I being engaged? Knowing what keeps me motivated through the unique times and going through allows me to keep my motivation up. And when that happens, and when I'm motivated, it's contagious. And maybe it might be a bad word to use at this time in our world events, but it gets us moving into the right steps, the right track. I also ask myself, am I modeling the right level of engagement? You know, I've kind of talked about this, to expect somebody to do something because I said so when I'm not modeling it, it's just the exercise in futility. It's just going to waste your time, and you're going to lose that block of influence over them. With change management, when you have leadership engagement, and I keep talking about this because I've seen it drive the needle the right way. When we demonstrate that trait or action that we want the rest of the thing to go through, it's going to be not necessarily easy peasy to rest away, but it's going to be a better journey versus a 3-hour tour. It also helps to show that there's something in it for them. When I'm doing it and they see that I'm getting something out of it, they say, well, hey, it's not a waste of my time. Now, let's be honest, for some of your staff, being positively engaged just might be an act of change management. But that's what we're here for. Too much is given, much is expected. We must be able to do this. So, do you know your people? People tend to be social animals, and they like to interact. Even though we're doing stuff a lot behind PPE right now, a lot of the staff working virtually are not. Okay, something to consider when you're approaching how to encourage engagement is knowing what the work environment is. I have to interact different with people because I still have staff members that work in person, direct care. I have staff members that are actually working from home. And then we have this beautiful program called Microsoft Teams, and that's how some of us interact now. It's been a very hard thing for me in my new position because I'm a very social and interactive person, and I like to see reactions. So I'm assuming that everybody's loving this class right now, and everybody's taking copious notes and not on their phones because I don't see you right now, and I'm hoping for the best. But is that really true? Don't answer. Please don't answer. It'll hurt my fragile feelings. But how do you get tools to know your people? Well, believe it or not, there was actually a great article in the Rad Ideas within the ICE magazine page. Sandy, I'll just say Sandy because I did not want to mess up her last name, had something called a getting to know you form. She offered that this is something that you can use as a new leader in an organization or something when new staff comes in. Now, there's certain questions that you can't ask in personal, so I want you to be careful about that. But this is something nice, birthdays. Who doesn't want to know when somebody's birthday is? And you don't necessarily have to know what year. You can know that's July 30th. I'm not putting that date out for any specific reason, but July 30th is a great day to know about. Shift locations, sometimes do they have kids? Now that could be kind of a sticky one because people feel that that's a little personal, but if they're willing to let you know, you let them know. And when I've done this, I've done it under the pretense that you don't have to fill all this out. I'm just asking. There's different things in there. We do tend to have a lot of potlucks or we used to have a lot of potlucks or used to have special days. Knowing what that is great. Sports teams, some people tend to like this team called Green Bay Packers. I tend to like the Raiders. So, knowing that there's a little rivalry there, or it's kind of fun to know. But two things that I like about this one specifically is how do you like to be recognized? Some people are mortally afraid of standing up in front of their group. They are. Some of them don't care, but however you want to recognize them. Some of them don't. So that's good to know. When you learn about that, you kind of also find out a little bit about their personality. Now, to me, the thing I liked the most about this one, and I kept on mine, was what's the best methods of communicating for work related? Do you want to always be face to face? Do you want to have an email? Do you need memo? What is your best social interaction? One thing I added to this is I asked, what's your best way of learning? How do you learn best? Is it a see one, do one, teach one? Is it just hands-on? Do you want to read? Do you need to teach? And then, of course, what I also ask on this is just something for you to think about is, what are your goals 5 years from now? What are your goals 10 years from now? And I have it set up as professional, personal, and other. A lot of times personal goals aren't necessarily filled out, but professional goals. I had one gentleman tell me, he goes, because I was in the military, he goes, I want your job. I didn't take that as offense because that's what the military is about. So I said, okay, how are you going to get to that goal? They had no clue. So that made me excited because that now meant I needed to teach them on how to do stuff. So when you this helps foster engagement. So COVID-19 engagement. Let's be honest, we still feel a little uneasy about COVID-19. We finally got to this place where we feel like we know what we're doing, and now it's changing again. But we as leaders, we can help subside these concerns, I say through 3 steps that I have seen pretty successful. Be out and open. Broadcast what your safety plan is. Keep managers accountable online. But most importantly, use ongoing dialogue and rounding to address safety concerns. So and I'm sure there's more things we can add to this from yourself. And I hope that once you guys are talking later on extensively about this session at tonight's party, that you bring this up to each other. Now, another reason that I talk about engagement is it's a little bit on a personal tone. And I like to show you what can encouragement look like. And I'm going to read this right here so you guys don't have to put your glasses on. When housekeeper Tabitha Williams was working on the 6th South one day, she happened to look at an inpatient to say hello, and she noticed that the patient had turned blue. Williams quickly tried to get a response from him, but to no avail, and then asked registered nurse Hannah Youngdale to assist. Youngdale immediately assessed the patient, called a code blue, and initiated several rounds of CPR. Thanks to the alertness and quick reactions of both Williams and Youngdale, the patient regained his pulse and transferred to the intensive care unit. So this right here, this picture itself is about engagement. What my organization did, and this was at my organization up here in the Seattle area on Fort Lewis Army base called Madigan Army Medical Center, is they put this out and they sent it one as an email to all the staff members as part of our HRO stuff. It was talked about when we had a HRO quarterly training session, and it was put on our internal and civilian webpage. I thought this was great when I saw it for a couple of reasons. One, it celebrated somebody doing something good. But if you look at Tabitha, it says she's a housekeeper. What medical training does she have? This was back in November of 2016. And I had heard about this from behind the scenes that this had happened. And when I found out about it, I immediately started bringing it up to the leadership of our military command team, as well as her contracting leadership, to say, hey, this is an amazing employee. I had kind of a vested interest in this. I knew the person. So when I went to go talk to her, and I asked her, I said, hey, Tabitha, may I ask, how did this happen? And she says, sure, I was doing my job. I was just walking around and talking to all my patients. I love talking to my patients. They're so much fun. And Tracy, man, that guy's ornery. He just gives me a hard time all the time. He just makes me laugh. So I was looking forward to talk to him. When she said this to me, it kind of blew me away. As I said before, she's not medically trained. Sometimes you have staff members that just do their job. But because she was proud to be part of this organization, and that she said, she goes, I play my part in this mission. She actually caught somebody who was dying. And as I said, this person, I know this person. His name is Tracy Phillips. He was married to Linda Phillips. I'm sorry, my apologies. I mentioned earlier that there was a leader who talked to me about the 5 Ws because I was just an aggressive, short person who didn't know anything. That's his wife. I met these two fine people in Landstuhl, Germany in 2000, right before the war broke out. And they kind of became the adoptive grandparents for my 2 children because I was in Germany. And to be honest with you, they used to talk about like they used to come to see us. They didn't come to see us. They came to see my 2 daughters. So what had happened was that Tracy, as I said, became kind of a grandfather to my oldest daughter, Jessica. And this is her on the far left. And then my youngest daughter, Adriana, and then that's his wife, Dia, and my beautiful wife on the right there. I'm gonna get a little choked up, so I'm gonna kind of say this. My daughter was in school at UIW down in San Antonio, and every time she came up to visit, she would spend like 2 days with them because we're just the parents, but these are her adoptive grandparents. And this interaction with Tracy being in the hospital and turning blue happened because he had a brain tumor that hadn't been discovered at the time. He was in the hospital for something else, and he was feeding himself peas. But as a result of this brain tumor, he didn't realize he was still feeding himself peas, and he had actually got some of the peas in his lungs. So luckily, Miss Williams' actions saved Tracy's life. This actually happened 3 days before Christmas break. Excuse me for a second. Because of this young lady's actions, she afforded my daughter the opportunity to come home and see Tracy again. We spent most of this 2 weeks break, which is over Christmas, at the hospital, in and out, as much as we could. We had Dia over for dinner on Christmas Eve. And then when Tracy's family came in from Utah, we hosted them in our house, between his house and our house, to have enough room. One of the amazing things about Tracy that has happened this time, because of that tumor that all of a sudden just presented itself, he started losing the ability to recognize people. Though I kind of don't think he forgot who I was, because he called me by a certain name that I won't say here, and it kind of was very fitting for what he called me before, so I'll just leave it at that. But when Jessica finally made it home and came in the room, and we were able to go to the ICU, he sat up and just started talking to her. Just started talking to her about school and all that good stuff. So to leave this at this, I'm sorry. That engagement from that team, from Miss Williams, allowed my daughter to say goodbye, because Tracy passed away New Year's Day. And we got to have some special moments just because of engagement from staff. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm sorry. But this is we still kind of do stuff with Dia now, and this is the last time we have fun. Jessica wasn't there because she was in college at the time, but she just graduated this weekend, and we all flew down to San Antonio. And Dia says she moved down to San Antonio 2 years ago because she needed to get away from this area because it reminded her too much of Tracy. But we all know she moved down to be close to my daughter, so we'll leave it at that. I would like to, as we're starting to get closer to the closing of this, and we work towards the question section, I would like to have you guys start and think to yourself that besides listening to somebody who puts you to sleep and is kind of a blithering idiot and can't compose himself when he talks about something personal. I would like you to talk to yourself. What are you going to take back to your organization? What are you going to take back that you can improve upon? Because we're all smart people. We're all great leaders. We wouldn't be here at this organization right now, this conference, if we weren't. Because let's be honest, we can take our CEUs online. We can take it at home. I'm pretty sure most of us joined us or came to here, one, because we had to get out of our house a little bit, but we came to these to learn. So with that in mind, what have you been doing well? And I want you to just, write it down somewhere and look at it. And I say write it down because I don't want you to forget it between tonight's party and your flight home tomorrow. And then when you get back to work, whether it's this week or next week, just pull out your notes and go, what was it that I was supposed to remember? What was it that I was going to improve upon in my engagement? Also, what are you going to take action on when you do return? Is there something that you have a staff member that you realize that as I was talking about these different scenarios that you're like, wow, I know how to help bring them back into the fold. I know how to do so. And to be honest with you, it's not that you learned it here. You've already known it. This is just a reminder, a booster shot, if you will, pun intended, for our current predicament, world events, and go home to your organization and be the best leader that you can. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and now open up to questions, but if you have any questions, but before I do, I want to share my email, and I want to invite you that to oh my God, I just lost my train of thought. To partner with me and be a connection on LinkedIn. I ask that you just send a message to me that just says, hey, I fell asleep during your session today. Can we be connections on LinkedIn? With this, I will open up to the group.
Thank you, John. That was great. Does anyone have any questions?